Welcome to the fourth edition of the Outdated Wrestling Hour. Boy, this time is a good one. They got something I can really sink my polydent soaked dentures into. Old-time wrestling magazines. I collected all of them. First wrestling magazine I ever bought was Wrestling World, with Big Tex McKenzie, the cowboy, on the cover. Hey, wait a minute. Where's all the cowboys in wrestling these days? I don't see them. There was Tex McKenzie. There's Cowboy Bob Orton. And Cowboy Bob Orton Jr., Cowboy Bob Ellis, Cowboy Bill Watts. They even had a little fella named Cowboy Lang. I don't see no cowboys anymore. Then again, I don't see my feet anymore either. Well, anyway, it's the Outdated Wrestling Hour. Paper cuts and pinfalls. That's right, wrestling magazines. That's what we're going to talk about in this edition, number 4 of the Outdated Wrestling Hour. How's everybody? It's Bob Smith again, the guy from PWI, Inside Wrestling, The Wrestler, WCW Magazine, all different kinds of wrestling magazines. And I am now happy and thrilled to be the host of the Outdated Wrestling Hour. Things are going great here, by the way. Thank you all very much. As always, thank you all a whole bunch. I mean, things are going so well. I can't even put it into words. I've reached every goal already. I'm absolutely thrilled with doing this particular show, and I'm having a lot of fun doing it. And I'm going to have a lot of fun today because our guest is the great Mike Liotis from Wrestler Weekly. If you don't know what Wrestler Weekly is, we're going to explain it to you today. And we're going to have a great wrestling conversation with one of the guys that I think has as much wrestling knowledge of the past and the present as anybody I've ever met. So we're going to have a lot of fun. But first, we're going to take a little look back at the wrestling magazines. What memories, man. Spending my allowance on the writers and the photographers that I remember, all those different magazines. Remember the writers? Bill Apter. Who doesn't remember my buddy Bill? Norman Keitzer out of Minnesota. Tom Burke, who seemed to be everywhere. Don Liable. Frank Amato, Sandy Krebs, Craig Peters, who I got to work with, George Napolitano, the great photographer as well, Roger Elwood, Lou Sahadi. You remember all those names? I do. I remember like it yesterday. You know the great photographers, Bill Otten, Bill Apter, of course, again, George Napolitano, of course, again. If you had a discerning eye, you could catch the names of Jim Cornette and Paul Heyman. Remember Linda Rufa and Eddie Cheslock and Dr. Mike Lano, and so many different people had bylines in the wrestling magazines. And let's go over the wrestling magazines that we all used to read. I'll end with my company, but that I hooked up with. But I remember the Starlog group that George Napolitano worked for. People called them the George Napolitano magazines, like Superstar Wrestler, Wrestling Scene, and Wrestling All-Stars. Very colorful, slick paper, big photos. Yeah, they had their mark. So many people used to pin those pictures up on their bedroom walls when they were kids. I know because I had friends that did it. Now, I'll tell you a little secret. I shouldn't even say this, but it's the truth. I know I was lucky to get a job with Stanley Weston's magazines in Rockville Center, the GC London wrestling magazines, and I don't regret a second of it. But growing up, my favorite wrestling magazines were the Norman Keitzer magazines. I'm not kidding. Wrestling Monthly, The Ring Wrestling, Wrestling Review. Those agate pages were awesome. I know they were very dry. They were the pulpy paper, not a lot of color to them. And the headline writing was kind of bland. And, you know, it was from Minnesota, don't you know? But I will say this. The magazines really hit hard for me because of those beautiful agate pages. Those wrestling results from all over the country in that agate type. Fantastic. I never missed an issue. Here's to you, Norman. I thought your magazines were great. I loved them. Then there was something called Wrestling Monthly, and I think Keitzer got a hold of that in later years. I remember they specialized in bloody covers, and they were very pulpy, very. It's a real headline: "Drenched in blood. Why they enjoy it?" Nobody enjoyed that. I will admit the 1970s were the high point of bloody wrestling covers. London did it. They all did it. Here's an actual headline that I had on a wrestling magazine cover. I don't remember the magazine, but I remember this headline like it was yesterday. Talk about not understanding wrestling psychology. You ready for this one? Gushing flows of blood you missed until now. What the hell? I mean, talk about just lurid. The wrestling magazines made it seem like every wrestling match was full of people slicing each other up and bleeding profusely. Blood usage had a psychology to it, but the wrestling magazines didn't seem to know that, including Wrestling Monthly. Okay. And then there was names like the Big Book of Wrestling and the Official Wrestling Guide and the Complete Wrestling Roundup. They were published between, I think, the late 60s to the late 70s. And they were really, I guess, I thought they were corny. They didn't do it for me. Not everything can be great. But I love Wrestling World. Remember Wrestling World? Every great name wrote for its magazine, including my short-lived ECW color man, Stately Wayne Manor. Now, this is the truth. In Todd Gordon's original Eastern Championship Wrestling, they had some cards locally in Philadelphia, and I actually did play-by-play with Stately Wayne Manor as my color man. And you know what? I looked back at the tape for the first time a couple years ago, and they really weren't that bad. And I walked away from them because I thought I sucked. I guess it wasn't really all that awful, but you know what? Things worked out good for ECW because they met a guy named Joey Styles pretty quickly after that. Pretty good, huh? Then there was another type of magazine, Wrestling Sports Stars used to be the name. Remember Wrestling Sports Stars of 1972 or Wrestling Sports Stars of 1973? They popped up every now and again. Then there was something called the Wrestling Guide, a really pulpy paper. And another wrestling magazine I had a copy of was Popular Wrestling. But I ended up working for GC London and publisher Stanley Weston and editor-in-chief Stu Sachs. And let's list all the wrestling magazines they published. And I bet you I'm missing one or two. You ready for this? Pro Wrestling Illustrated, which started in 1979. Inside Wrestling, The Wrestler, Wrestling Superstars, Ben Strong Wrestling, Sports Review Wrestling, Wrestler Weekly, which I used to work on, Wrestling USA, Wrestling Bad Guys, Wrestling's Greatest Battles, Wrestle America, Wrestling Classics, Wrestling Picture Book. And there was a series of digest, yearly wrap-up digest books that they published. And I'm sure I left stuff out. There's no way I didn't. Wow. Of course, some of the stuff was really lurid. Stanley had a way of getting under your skin when sales were bad. Remember the apartment wrestling matches? The buxom babes in their bikinis ripping them off and stuff like that. And, very posed, but they were popular. And of course, they did the bloody covers thing too. Lots of bloody. Bobby Heenan's covers were unreal. Boy, he could bleed a gusher, couldn't he? And they also had those dramatic profiles of wrestlers that veered into some pretty ridiculous compartmentalizations. Bruno Sammartino battling the Nazis, you name it. So in any event, you can still find scads of wrestling magazines sale at eBay, Etsy, and bookstores all over the country. And thank goodness for that. And I want to give a shout out to somebody I worked with too that really is the unsung hero of the GC London glory years. And that's art designer Ken Morgan, who always used the right font for the title and always used the right type of feel in the pictorials. He really had a flavor and a touch for what we were trying to express every single time. He nailed it every single time. His covers were fantastic. And I want to just send a shout out to wherever you are, Ken Morgan. I know he went on to work for Topps Baseball Cards after he left GC London, but you know what? He was great. And he was a great guy too. Ken Morgan, the art director for some of the classic PWI, Inside Wrestling, and the Wrestler covers. Hats off to you, buddy. And another buddy that I have is Mike Liotis from Wrestler Weekly, and he's going to be our interview subject in just a little bit. I want to, before we get to that, I have a sponsor in this, starting with the show. It's a local sponsor. I still can't believe this is happening. I started talking about the podcast with some people that I know. I am an avid bowler. I'm not the world's greatest bowler. I'm not awful, but I hold my own sometimes. I have a 300 ring. I bowled a perfect game once, and I bowled in tournaments all over the country and regionally, and I enjoy it. I really love bowling. And I started to talk to the proprietor about my new podcast venture. And he said, I'll place an ad. I said, you've got to be kidding. You're so regional. And I thought about it, and I realized, I have a podcast host, and the podcast host actually lets you know where people are listening around the country. And our initial broadcasts, it became very apparent that our main people who are listening at this point, up to this point, are in New York, Long Island, New Jersey, the East Coast, because that's where I was from. And a lot of people know me here. So I figured, well, if you ever visit New York City or Long Island or the East Coast, this particular venue was perfect to have fun in. So here comes our first ad ever on the Wrestling Hour, and I hope you would come and visit this wonderful bowling center in New Hyde Park, New York, in the heart of Nassau County, Long Island. Check this out. Hey, are you in the mood for something fun to do with your family? Get together for a fun and exciting time bowling at Harold Lanes in New Hyde Park, New York. Harold Lanes brings back the nostalgic atmosphere of bowling along with its fantastic cafe and bar selections. The food is not your typical bowling alley offerings. Take it from me. That's the truth. The food is delicious. Harold Lanes also offers adult and junior leagues as well as coaching classes for the kids. The kids' birthday parties, fundraisers, and adult parties are always a huge hit. Reasonably priced and conveniently located at 465 Herrick's Road in New Hyde Park, New York, Harold Lanes is open 7 days a week, 10 a.m. to midnight. You need more information? Give them a call at 516-741-8022. That's 516-741-8022 for Harold Lanes in New Hyde Park, New York. Well, it's time for our special guest this week, and it is a great pleasure of mine to bring on Mr. Mike Liotis from Wrestler Weekly. Mike, how are you?
Hey, Bob. Good to be on, and always good to connect with you when we can.
Well, I am proud to say I'm a two-time guest on your YouTube channel, and I always appreciated coming on. And when Mike and I get together, we tend to talk for about 3 hours.
And that's not recorded. That's the non-recorded portion.
No, it's usually before or after we do our little bits. And we have a lot in common. We have a deep, abiding love for old school wrestling.
It's been our lifeblood. It's just been something that has been something that I've turned to from very early in my life, even to today. Something that I've always looked to as an escape, but also something that's just brought me enjoyment like nothing else has in my life.
I hear you. Same with me, man. Same with me. It's meant a lot to me. So let's talk about, and I want to get my listeners involved with Wrestler Weekly. What is it? How can people hear it and see it? Just tell me the whole story behind the concept and how you and another fellow came up with this great idea.
So the great idea of Wrestler Weekly started 6+ years ago with my buddies Scotty and Reggie Richardson, two brothers who grew up in the Mid-Atlantic and Florida regions and were absolutely addicted to all things pro wrestling. And they collected the magazines, and they were big into the magazines. I mean, every cover they can get, looking through the back issues with a magnifying glass to see what covers they can get that they didn't have. And so they started Wrestler Weekly, birthed out of that passion. About a year into it, we just happened to meet. It was almost like a divine intervention. And got to talking and was invited to join the team because I also I'm about 10 years younger than Scotty and Reggie, but I grew up in Staten Island, New York, in the height of Hulkamania. But I always had a love for pro wrestling, traded for tapes for the time I was little, and also collected the magazines just like they did. So we had a lot in common, and we were able to talk about angles and just things that we grew up on. So it was a natural fit. And so where their love for wrestling skewed 70s and 80s and mine skewed really probably just, 80s. And don't get me wrong, I love my 70s stuff. But I grew up, 80 through 85 was my jam. So long story short, we married this together. And it's a celebration. It's a celebration of the work of the magazines, guys like yourself, Bob, Bill Apter, George Napolitano, so many of you who gave to us. And it's a way for us to pay that forward and show that work all these years later. But so what we do is we share the different items that we've collected. We've gotten into collecting not only wrestling magazines, but championship belts, programs, other memorabilia. And we just enjoy sharing it with people. And we also encourage people to share their collections with us. For us, it's not about who has the most or who has the best collection. It's about enjoying your collection and being able to share it with others and being able to share the stories of why that collection means something to you. Because everybody has wrestling, depending on where you grew up with wrestling being so territorial as it was in the days. Maybe you grew up in Oklahoma and you grew up on Mid-South Wrestling. Maybe you grew up in Tampa, Florida, and you grew up on Championship Wrestling from Florida. So it just connects people in a way that I've not seen anything connect. You see people who still talk about, you take a look at World Class and the Von Erichs, the amount of people who still talk about what it was like to be at the Sportatorium. You just connect with those things. And so it's an opportunity to bring people together through pro wrestling.
Really cool. It is really cool. And I'll tell you how I discovered you guys. I'm still on Twitter, as roading as it is. I'm still on Twitter. Okay. And I guess it was about 2 or 3 years ago. I'm just scrolling and somebody had retweeted one of your, I think it was an Inside Wrestling cover. And it was beautifully autographed by the stars on the cover. And it was one of the ones I know I had worked on. And I went, wow, somebody remembers, right? So then I discovered more and more, and I kept looking into you guys. And I really, it's my favorite thing on Twitter. I'm telling you, there's nothing that entertains me as much as seeing the ratings, the covers that are autographed, the championship belts that look so beautiful and real. It's fantastic. And I can't imagine that the listeners of this show wouldn't want to check it out.
Well, it's really cool. You can find us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at Wrestler Weekly. Find us on our YouTube channel as well, Wrestler Weekly. We started recently dabbling in TikTok a little bit. So just, going out there and highlighting the wrestling that not only means something to us, but hearing about the wrestling that means something to our listeners, to the people that follow us, highlighting things where people, and it creates great conversation. I love it when somebody comments on something, they go, oh, I remember that match, or do you remember when this happened? And it's so cool to be able to have those conversations with people who remember it in a certain way, who remember what it was like as a kid. Or, I can't believe that guy won. You know what I mean? He was, so-and-so was my favorite. So it's really cool to bring people back to that place, because for us, it harkens back to our childhood, a simpler time in our lives. And even when the chips were down with tough times in our lives, wrestling was always there. It was always constant. And so to be able to honor the folks who gave their bodies, who gave their lives to do this, but more importantly too, like I said, the folks who worked on the magazines, that we've been able to create beautiful relationships. That's why, like I said, Bob, when you had reached out and let us know about your new show, it was a no-brainer to come on, because you've been a friend to us. And we love and thank you for all the great work that you've done. So sharing those ratings, sharing those different pieces of the mags that we love so much, it's a labor of love, and hopefully it does give back to you and shows you that your work meant something so much more than just putting out a publication.
Well, I'll tell you what, from the very first moment, when I get a vibe about something, Mike, it's usually spot on. When I was 11 or 12 years old, I used to fight with my parents on Sundays, because Sunday at 11 on my local TV station is when WWF Wrestling was on.
Yep.
Okay. Something inside me told me I had to see this.
Yeah.
I could not miss this. I felt it. So we argued for a while, and after about 6 months, I got my way, and they let me stay home and watch wrestling while they went to church. Okay? Now, what did I end up doing? I ended up with Pro Wrestling Illustrated. If I hadn't stayed home and watched those matches, I know I wouldn't have the knowledge base that I needed to do something like that. Now, here's vibe number 2. The very first time I saw you guys display wrestling magazines on Twitter, I said, they feel the same way I do. The reason you guys started Wrestler Weekly is the same reason I started this podcast, Mike, to go back to the times when wrestling was a must. We had to watch it.
Yeah.
We talked about it. We collected the magazines. We schemed to get tickets when we could, when wrestling came to town, no matter what kind of a town you lived in, big or small. It felt important. Am I right?
Oh, 100%. I can remember, when I was a kid, my parents had just gotten divorced. So I was at my dad's on the weekends, and every Saturday noon, the WWF came on Channel 5. So we're talking about 1987-ish. And then 6:05 right after dinner, I was in front of that television for World Championship Wrestling. And that was when they had the little Techwood studio with all the flags hanging. But I remember, Tony Schiavone coming on, and it was a must. I could not miss it. And it was just an incredible time. It was my everything. It was just what I hung on. And I, like I said, my first memories, are of Hogan and Piper, and it was like, wow, what a time, to be alive during rock and wrestling. And I know a lot of times folks go, oh, but it's all the NWA, and I love the NWA, but to go and grow up in New York during Hulkamania at its peak was an unbelievable, it was must see. It was everywhere. And it was a hell of a time to grow up.
Sure. I mean, let's face it, Vince McMahon in that period was a genius.
Oh, yeah. It just worked.
I remember going to Albany, New York when I was a kid to see pro wrestling, and it was WWF, and they literally sold tickets out of cigar boxes.
Yeah.
No, really. Yeah. They would pull your ticket out of a cigar box.
Oh, 100%.
I think he modernized it a little, don't you?
a tiny bit. And you know what? And you take a look, and I recently watched back some Saturday Night's Main Event from that era, and the color and the lighting and everything, the music videos they were featuring, it was a bright, youthful type of product. They had a certain aim, and it was a dynamite package. It was a dynamite, production that they put on that was really geared towards the youth of that era. And it was really something.
It was. They changed it all. And a lot of it for the better. Not all of it. Not all of it for the better, but enough of it to make it more mainstream and garner a television audience that the other promotions could never have dreamed of.
No. And I think too, on the flip side of that, you take a look, there was also nothing like a smoky Spartanburg Memorial Arena,
right,
for NWA Mid-Atlantic Wrestling. You never heard a louder audience. When they just had that Sami Zayn angle at the Royal Rumble in San Antonio, the pop that he got when he hit Roman Reigns in that chair, my first immediate thought was, this was the type of noise you heard in Mid-Atlantic Wrestling on a weekly basis. They were so into it. Right. It was the best. And you even talk when it got out of Mid-Atlantic into, Flair and Dusty and the Horsemen. I mean, that kind of passion just carried over. But that region, and again, a lot of that was why Wrestler Weekly got started. Was why Scotty and Reggie were so hooked. It's incredible, so it didn't need to be mainstream to be good, but it definitely changed the landscape. I'll say that. Right.
Hey, listen, before we talk a little bit more about then versus now, which I really want to do with you, tell me a little bit about Scott's book.
Yeah.
Because I consider, and I said it on last week's podcast, the best book about wrestling ever written by a non-wrestler. And please tell him I said that.
Oh, I will. We certainly appreciate that. Family bacon.
No, seriously, for my listeners, it really is. This is a must read. And tell the listeners a little bit about that book, how it came about, and what your feelings are about it.
So Scotty, really wrote from the heart. It was his experience of being a wrestling fan, waking up on a Saturday morning to watch Mid-Atlantic Championship Wrestling with his family every Saturday. So the title of the book is Family Bacon Wrestling.
I laugh every time I hear it.
He woke up and he would smell the bacon, and that's how he knew it was Saturday morning. And they sat in front of the television with a big breakfast, bacon every Saturday, the bacon, the sausage and the biscuits, all that, that Southern home cooking, and sat and watched together as a family, Mid-Atlantic Championship Wrestling. It also delves into how it was the wrestling magazine, and we loved the two kinds of covers of wrestling magazines: covers with championship belts and covers that feature a whole lot of blood. Mm-hmm. And it was the covers that feature a whole lot of blood that got wrestling banned in Scotty's house for a number of years. Scotty's father was also a minister. And had just gone through a time where he was just a little sensitive about things. Mm-hmm. Saw a real bloody Harley Race Blackjack Mulligan cover. And this was at the height of, they were living in Florida at the time, the height of Kevin Sullivan and the Army of Darkness, which, if you read the aftermags, referred to them as Satanists. And so that decided for the Richardson family, there was no more wrestling. It was not allowed. They eventually did come back, and you'll hear the story of how they did that. But it is a boys' love affair with pro wrestling, what it has meant to them. And I agree, for my money, the best non-wrestler book of, wrestling book out there.
Oh, yeah. It's funny. It's funny. It's poignant. It's breezy to read. It's a real quick read, so you don't really have to, sit down for 12 days and read it.
Yeah.
The information is so precise.
Yeah.
That I find it remarkable.
Scotty he's an encyclopedia of pro wrestling, and for him, and that's another reason why he started Wrestler Weekly again. And I have to give him so much credit, not only and again, this is somebody that we met through the annals of Twitter, we now do a trip. We have Wrestler Weekly weekend every year. And we convene down in Raleigh where he's stationed. We went and saw the Greensboro Coliseum. We went and saw WRAL Studios this past year where they taped Mid-Atlantic Wrestling. So we do some trips and things like that and see old wrestling venues and stuff like that. But just one of the finest people I've ever met. His brother Reggie, a little bit more behind the scenes, tech help and things like that. Reggie's down in Jacksonville, Florida. But we've made some great friends, fans, and family through this, yourself included, Bob. But to him, it's the details, and that's what really makes it all magical.
It's tremendous. And tell them where you can get the book.
You can get the book on Amazon, or you can go right to our Twitter at Wrestler Weekly. We have a link in our pinned tweet, but right on Amazon, you can get it there. We also have a Pro Wrestling Tees t-shirt shop. You can get a nice Wrestler Weekly tee or hoodie or something like that. So feel free, it supports us. It really helps us in a big way. So please, if you want to support us, Amazon.com. Family Bacon Wrestling is the book. We also have another book in the works that Scotty is working on that highlights the Super Bowl of wrestling that featured Harley Race and superstar Billy Graham. The working title right now is Belt versus Belt, and features not only the Graham Race match, but highlights other champion versus champion matches throughout history. So should hopefully be 2023, 2024, but something Scotty's putting a lot of work in. And if you liked his first book, you'll love this one.
I'm sure. And I think you guys just got $30 off of me, because it's like, I love wearing esoteric t-shirts. And if I sport my Wrestler Weekly shirt, that's just too good.
Oh yeah. No, we love it.
You can practically count on getting a sale tonight, because it's like, that sounds like it's right up my alley. So
awesome.
All right. So now that people know what you are, let's find out some opinions from you. I am an old school guy. I think you're a little more forgiving of new school wrestling. What do you like about current wrestling, and what do you not like about it?
Um, I'll start with what I like. I really think Triple H being at the helm is a really good thing for wrestling. I see a lot more cohesion in storytelling recently. I like to see the divisions make sense and the titles mean something. So I think we're seeing more of that in the current product. I love seeing the throwbacks to the old school wrestling. I'll never tire of hearing Cody Rhodes talk about his father.
Yeah.
And the throwbacks to that. Same thing with Roman Reigns and his family. I love that lineage. And I respect the athletes of today. The athletic capabilities that they have is remarkable. I think you could have incredible athleticism and still tell a tremendous story in a match. One of the things, and one of my favorite things about today is the women's wrestling.
Yes.
I think the women's wrestling has come farther than it ever has. We have, and can you imagine if some of the ladies of yesteryear had the opportunities of today? I mean, you have some of the finest wrestlers in the world today are the women's wrestlers. And there's so many good ones to name. Rhea Ripley is a favorite of mine right now.
Oh yeah.
Love what she's doing. And really, I try not to separate them from the men because, to me, that would do their work a disservice. To me, they are every bit as good as the guys.
Well, they have reached parity.
Yeah.
They are even now. They are promoted equally.
Yeah.
We've seen women's matches as main event, big cards. They are now on an even keel with the men. And I think that's the most healthy thing ever to happen in wrestling in 30 years.
Yeah. And one of the things I enjoy about it is that you could, like you said, you could have a women's card, a full women's card. And it's like, wow, this is great. People clamor for it. You could have women in the main event. So I love the athleticism of these men and women. I really respect what they do. And I like it when they keep it simple. Times are going to change. Things are going to change, right? It's not going to always be in the smoky backlit rooms, but I think WWE puts on a wrestling show a lot, and you can see some actual wrestling, and not that AEW doesn't at times. But some of the things that I don't like is I don't like things waiting, like people waiting for dives. I cannot stand that.
That is,
a
product of letting wrestlers book their own matches.
Yeah, like I don't enjoy.
They're filling time.
Yeah,
it has to be more succinct. It has to be more.
It has to make sense.
Well, right along with that, these 75 near pin matches have got to go.
No, yeah, it's too much. It's too much dependent, and finishers mean nothing.
Right.
Finishers don't mean anything. It used to be a rarity where a guy kicked out of a finisher. And I also too, and I'm a guy who's a proponent of, I think blood in a match can enhance it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't need Jon Moxley blading every match. It loses its luster. Why? You know what I mean? Like, I feel like and he's a tremendous talent. Some of the matches he's had have been incredible. I think some of the things it can tone down on is like the cursing.
Yes.
I don't think it adds anything to a promo.
It's cheap heat.
Yeah.
Anybody can curse, giving the finger too. It's too easy. It's just cheap heat. Some fans may boo it, but you know what? You're not working. If you have to resort to those things to get heat, you're not doing it right.
Yeah, and like I said, there's a lot of things that I like that AEW does. They really run a fun show. And I've seen them live and in person, and I got to tell you, what they do live is very fun and engaging. And I got to tell you who was the best live. When I went, and it was a long taping. It was dark. It was Dynamite, and then it was Rampage. I was done by the time Rampage, but Chris Jericho stole the show. Chris Jericho can go. And at 51, 52 years old, he's still the best guy on the card. And that's no disrespect to the younger guys. Guys like a Bandito, man, that young guy can go. Him and Jericho put on an absolute banger. The athleticism of these guys and girls is just unreal. But I think, when you look at a guy who has the fundamentals like a Chris Jericho, plus some of the newer stuff that he can do, I think it's just tremendous,
Okay, now it's my 10 cents, okay?
All right.
Now, here's the things that bug me about modern wrestling. Badly. Or not modern wrestling. I always use that term. That's the wrong term. Today's wrestling is the term. It's all modern. I mean, everything from the 70s on is modern wrestling. But today's wrestling, you need the suspension of disbelief.
Yes.
In order to make wrestling work. I still believe that. If people think it's just a big show, it ain't going to work.
Yeah, 100%.
And people will eventually tune it out. Even people who are really into it in their younger years. That's what bothers me.
Yeah.
I worry that a lot of today's younger fans are transient.
Yeah.
They're into wrestling now, but if they keep having lousy stuff shoved into their faces, they may tune it out and then go back to video games or, cable TV or Netflix.
Yeah.
If it's just a show, you can watch a show on Netflix.
Yeah.
There are, there's a few things that really bother me. There's a few things they do over and over that really bother me. Number one, okay, guy in the locker room is shining his shoes or lacing them up. Here comes another guy. And they're going to have a discussion about match strategy in front of a cameraman.
Yeah.
We're supposed to believe we're peeking in on these people. We're not.
Yeah.
So how can I believe what I'm seeing? Because it's supposed to be, how did this camera just arrive? Like the other day, it was Jey Uso and Sami Zayn meeting outside where the buses park. And we're hearing their conversation, which is supposed to be a private conversation between the two, but it's being broadcast on SmackDown. Yeah. Come on.
And that's even part of the storyline, right?
Yeah, but it's part of the storyline. But you know what? Don't do it.
Yeah.
It doesn't
100%.
help. It doesn't help. It makes people go, I'm watching a show.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, setting Bray Wyatt on fire is just a show.
Yeah, 100%. And then he's back 3 weeks later.
Right. That's exactly what I said on a previous podcast. Yeah. He came right back. He's not dead. Yeah. Also, I really am bothered by the word death is in pro wrestling now. I'm going to kill you.
Yeah.
The fact that pinning a guy shoulders to the mat is no longer enough. You have to pulverize him to the point of almost being crippled. Even if it's, not really happening, it's what it looks like is happening. The fact that every winner has to practically render his opponent unconscious bothers me.
Well, and you take a look back, right, at, let's go back 1983, Flair for the gold, right? Race puts the bounty on Flair's head. It was unthinkable that somebody would collect the bounty on Flair. And then Flair comes back with the bat. And what does he say he's going to do? I'm not just going to hurt you. He's like, I'm going to take it out by taking that 10 pounds of gold, And he finished Race at Starrcade by what? Taking the belt. Not by crippling him, not by ending his career, by winning the championship.
Right. Everything is titled. That's why titles are so important. People kept them for a long time. Now
I hate it when people say titles are just a prop. Like I've heard Bischoff say that.
Well, it is when you have 17 titles. Yes, they're just a prop.
Yeah.
But there should be few titles and they should be very important.
Yeah, 100%.
That's the key. There's again this like I spoke about it in a previous show. I got into wrestling to learn the psychology of wrestling. What makes a match good? What makes an angle good? What makes a series of matches good?
Yeah.
What makes a personality magnetic? The psychology behind getting people to leave their houses and buying tickets and going to see a card.
Yeah.
That's what I was into. I wasn't into meeting wrestlers. I wasn't into say, hey, I drove in a car with, Crush. No.
Yeah.
Which I did do, by the way. Yeah. But that's not why I got into it. The reason I got into it is I wanted to learn. And I'm telling you, some of my great moments with PWI was sitting in a lounge with Gordon Soley talking wrestling psychology. Sitting and having dinner with Buddy Rogers talking wrestling psychology.
100%.
Going to Memphis and sitting with Eric Embry talking wrestling psychology.
Yeah.
Those were the moments that I think I enjoyed as much as anything I ever did at PWI, because you know what? They understood where I was coming from, because, at the point when I was with PWI, wrestling was starting to fade a little bit.
Yeah.
Our wrestling magazine sales were starting to fade a little bit. And, look now, PWI is the last Mohican. There's nobody left.
No. And, it's so funny how you mentioned, the differences. Like, I look at it, modern wrestling now is almost trying to recreate things that have already happened, instead of creating new things. So for instance, right, like now it's like commonplace, well, let's have them have a best of 7 series. It'll be epic. Like, not let's make this new thing. Like, they think that just because they're having the best of 7, it's going to be epic, but it might not be, like similar to college football, right? So Boise State, Oklahoma University, 2006, to me, might be the greatest college football game ever played. But now with this college football playoff and these underdogs getting in, TCU had no business being on the field with, in the championship game, but they're consistently trying to recreate Boise and Oklahoma. That worked because it happened. You know what I mean? Like,
right.
It was, now you're trying to recreate it, and you can't recreate magic that way. It's the same thing with wrestling today. The bloodline story works because it makes sense.
Right. Right. Yeah.
And you're not trying to recreate the wheel. Sami Zayn is over because he's likable. You know what I mean? Because he's done things that have connected with you. And I will say this, Cody is still the guy to take the belt off of Roman. This is not a recreation of Daniel Bryan. If they tried to recreate Daniel Bryan in this, it would have failed. This happened because he's been featured every week and it has worked. It is connected. But by all means, he is not the guy, nor should he be the guy to dethrone Roman Reigns, because you can't try to catch lightning in a bottle twice. Cody is over because he connects,
Well, WWE has a way of drawing things out. Like, I know my opinion on the post-match Sami Zayn bloodline thing at the Rumble, it was good, but it could have taken about a third of the time that it took.
Oh, 100%.
Too many chair shots, too much of a beating. I mean,
yeah.
The drama was simply the so-called betrayal and Uso, walking away.
Yeah.
That could have been done in half the time.
100%. 100%.
They have this way of just, if you can hit a guy with a chair once, if you hit him 26 times, it's better somehow. And I don't think it is.
No, 100%.
So, it takes a little long to tell a story, but I will admit this, the aftermath was effective because it's all everybody talked about the whole following week.
Yep. And so again, wrestling doesn't have to be this complicated thing. Simple works. And I think a lot of times people, and we do this as humans, we overcomplicate things. It doesn't mean that you can't have a fantastic ladder match with high spots. But when you're depending just on the high spots and not telling a story in between those spots and building up to those spots that mean something, then it's just, you know what I mean? Like, it's a circus act, not a wrestling match.
Yeah. Well, there's other things too that bug me. Like Impact Wrestling, I talked about this on our first show. This is show number 4. On the first show, I complained, and this is true, that Impact Wrestling has had 2 simulated murders on its programming.
Yes.
Okay. Come on.
Yeah.
I know you're writing off people, but you know what? Come on, please.
Yeah.
Please. I mean, it's that's too much.
Yeah.
That's
agreed.
So far too much. Oh, the creativity is so new and fresh. No, it's not. It's desperate.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, please, you can't go that far. You cannot.
No, it's not what people watch wrestling for.
Right.
It's not a TV show. Even Michael Cole saying, and I think the Bloodline storyline is Emmy worthy. No, it's not. It's wrestling.
Yes. Stop. I know WWE brings in TV writers, Freddie Prinze, and all these people like that to do. They don't go back to wrestling people anymore. Believe me, I've tried. All right. They don't even pay me any mind. I have applied. I have talked to other wrestlers and said, can you drop a note? Oh yeah, I'll drop them a note. And they would not care to hear from wrestling people. They want to hear from entertainment people because it is real wrestling entertainment.
And somebody was saying it. I don't know if somebody asked Cornette, but they said, why don't people know who wrestlers are anymore? You ask anybody in the world who Hulk Hogan is, and 90% of people can still tell you, oh yeah, he's a wrestler. Outside of John Cena, who can people, and The Rock, who can people name? Most mainstream people can't tell you Roman Reigns, as great as he is. I don't think they can tell you who Roman Reigns is.
No, wrestling has not had even John Cena. Well, The Rock maybe, but for the most part, I don't think wrestling has had that focal point in a long time since Hogan, like you say.
Yeah,
it wasn't the Ultimate Warrior. I'll tell you that. They tried to make him another Hogan, but it did not work.
It didn't work, and I think too, you might find a certain generation that go, The Rock was a wrestler.
Yeah, right.
Who only know him as an actor.
Yeah.
Oh, so God. Yeah, I just.
And don't what? Let me just give a little praise where it's due. Oh God, was he good? Holy smokes, was he good?
He really was.
Oh my gosh, his promos alone were worth the price of admission.
Oh,
nobody better ever.
And you can go back and watch, and not everything is PC anymore, but like the meat and potatoes of his promos still stands up. It's why when he comes back, there's such a reaction, because Dwayne Johnson is still must watch. He's still must watch.
Yes, absolutely.
And that's why I think the Steve Austin match last year came off so well. People will be able to tell you who Steve Austin is,
Right.
It came off so well. It made Kevin Owens didn't even need to win that match. It made his whole career,
or at least enhanced it, at least
in a big way.
Right. I mean, Kevin's good.
He's very good.
Yeah.
He's and you know what too? He spent all this time, but he's such a great baby face.
I think he's a better baby face.
I think he's
baby face better than
likable.
He's a
likable guy with a family.
Yeah. No, he's cool. I still look. I still watch. Again, there are extreme things I don't want to see, and they're on all the time. I mean, Uncle Howdy, please, can we?
Yeah. The Bray Wyatt stuff is not good.
No, and it drags on and on and on, and even his most ardent fans are starting to turn on him.
Well, yeah, even prior to him, he came back, and it's same old. Like, it's just, for years it's like the promos ramble and don't make any sense, and you just never know what's happening if they just kind of let him wrestle.
I thought for a moment there they were going to let him do exactly that. And do you realize how over he would be if they had? Seriously, he would be so over as a face.
Oh, yeah.
You can do those rambling philosophical promos, fine.
Yeah.
But you know what? And, you saw the match, against LA Knight.
Yeah.
And the face was Bray Wyatt. Huh?
Yeah. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
I mean, it didn't
I
work.
don't like all this mystical, goofy, undead kind of stuff. It's just too over the top. The supernaturally kind of stuff. And too, like, I get why WWE does it, but they're going to be doing more of these pitch black, or there's going to be like a cinnamon toast crunch match at WrestleMania. Like, come on,
yeah, the cinnamon.
I get it for like the sponsorship, and it's why they won't go down to 2 hours on Monday nights. But good Lord, like, those who don't, learn from history are doomed to repeat it. Nitro going to 3 hours was like the beginning of the end. Raw does not need to be 3 hours, but they make too much money in advertising, and then they're never going to cut it.
Well, from what I'm told, wrestling gets a lower ad rate or ad buy rate than traditional TV programming does.
I'm sure
I don't know why
do.
That's true. So they actually probably need that third hour.
Oh, 100%.
Because they're not getting the rates.
100%.
Let's say Bob Bob Love's Asher Butler or whatever the name of the show is. Any of the shows that are on TV now, I think they get way higher ad rates than wrestling does.
Oh,
I don't know
yeah,
if that's a traditional feeling or,
I
know that SmackDown has been number one on Friday nights sometimes, but I don't think their ad rates are all that great.
Yeah, wrestling will always score good ratings, I think, on cable, even if they're not considered good ratings for wrestling. But wrestling always suffers from the fact that I think a lot of mainstream America still sees it as like lowbrow entertainment. And it's sad because it's a great form of entertainment.
Yes.
But people just seem to want to thumb their nose at it,
Well,
which is a shame because if
I don't know. Here's the thing. I don't know if it's a shame because wrestling at times has been very unsavory.
Yeah, very true. Very true.
And sometimes it's its own worst enemy. Like
100%.
Sabotaging people who bring their children to a high school wrestling card for the local Elks Club as a benefit and watching Abdul the Butcher hammer a guy for 15 minutes and have him bleed all over the place.
Yeah.
That's holding your audience hostage, and it's not fair.
No,
because
100%.
A lot of people who started to go to wrestling in the mid 80s were watching WWF and they heard, oh, wrestling is coming to town.
Yeah.
Right. And they go to a card that had nothing to do with WWF. And all of a sudden there's this bloody match with some heel because that's his shtick and he doesn't know how to shut it off in a high school.
Yep.
Do you know what I'm saying?
100%.
Wrestling hurts itself.
Well,
the backyard
100%.
wrestlers having this underground wrestling is hurting professional wrestling.
Well, and I think too, that's always, you talk about, modern wrestling. What I don't like, I do not like this garbagey, hardcore,
right.
light tubes and listen, that's no disrespect to the workers because they are tough as nails.
And allow me this. Professional wrestlers are and always will be the greatest athletes on the planet. I don't 100%. Care what anybody says. They work harder to get any kind of fame at all. They have to bust their asses and to dedicate their lives to it. They are fantastic athletes from soup to nuts.
Yeah.
But what bothers me today is they're working too hard.
Yeah.
They're working too hard. The risk of injury has never been greater, I don't think.
Yeah,
I'm just watching
100%.
These maneuvers they do, and I'm scared for them.
Yeah. Well, who's great is Crowbar, Devin Storm, and he always puts out there about working safe, training safe.
Mm-hmm.
Guys like that are going out there and mentoring younger people. And even Deonna Purrazzo said it, who I really love Deonna Purrazzo. And she had said, we really need to listen to these veterans who are giving us these advice, advice. And Tracy Smothers was great at that. You know what I mean? And God rest his soul.
Al Snow.
I think you need more of that. Not that, listen, all the old heads have it right. Listen, some of them are doing some of these things now and they're because they don't have a dollar to their name. But, I think teaching some of today's wrestlers who are going out there, work safe, train safe. This way, if you want to work later into your life, you can do it and not have to be broken, to be doing it.
Right. Like I've heard Al Snow talk to young wrestlers. He's got it. He knows
and he's doing great with Ohio Valley Wrestling. I mean, those guys and girls are getting it right.
Yeah.
Rogers up there, they're getting it right.
Does he look like he should still be working? Holy smokes.
100%. Rip, I mean, Rip's going to outlive us all.
No kidding. Well, listen, Mike, what a fantastic time speaking with you. It always is, man. Whether you're speaking to me or I'm speaking to you, tremendous. I can't thank you enough for being here. This is a real high watermark for our podcast. And I want everybody to listen to this podcast to get into Wrestler Weekly. There's nothing else like it out there. Well worth your time. Just so much fun. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you so much, Bob. And to all Bob's listeners, keep on listening. Bob Smith, one of the greatest guys in the world. If you love old school wrestling, this is your man.
Whoa, high praise indeed, my man. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I have to admit, I have a wonderful time speaking with Mike Liotis and the folks at Wrestler Weekly. I hope this is just the first and many opportunities they get to come on the show, and I'll come on their show anytime they ever feel like it, because I love them. I think they're awesome. Check them out, Wrestler Weekly, all over social media. You can't miss them. Well worth looking for them. Anyway, that's our show for this time. This is number 4. It has been a wonderful experience thus far. I wouldn't change a thing. I don't care if I get one doggone bit more successful than I am right now. This is the goods for me, man, and I'm hoping you folks are enjoying it too. Our opening and closing theme is Boogie Party by Kevin MacLeod, licensed under Creative Commons by Attribution 4.0 license. Fantastic musician, that Mr. MacLeod. You can hear Robert Charles' music, That's Me, on Amazon and Spotify. The executive producer of the Outdated Wrestling Hour is yours truly. Well, doesn't that sound official, huh? Our podcast host is Buzzsprout. Fantastic people there. We're having a wonderful time. We hope you come back for number 5. Remember, we're on every Friday now. A new show launches every Friday, every week from this point on. Come back and see us, y'all, will you? This is Bob Smith, and until next time, remember the classic words of Butcher Vachon. Get up, you coward!